You got it? Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. We so appreciate you coming to our budget meeting. So often we get 3 or 4 people, so this is a spectacular turnout. Really, really thrilled about that. Just before we get started, I think there's probably a few introductions we need to make around here. My name is Sheena McLeod, and I'm responsible for the finances here at the city, and I'll be doing your presentation tonight. But I see that we do have some of our councillors here. I think we have Mayor Richard Stewart. We have Councillor Linda Reamer, Councillor Neil Nicholson, and Councillor Doug McDonnell. And have I missed anyone? And we also have our MLA Diane Thorne, who used to be one of our councillors that's back visiting us tonight. So thank you all for coming and showing up. Tonight's meeting is part of our ongoing budget consultation process, and every year at this time, we try really hard to get some meaningful input from the residents in Coquitlam. But of course, there are now 120,000 of you, and so we need to have a number of different opportunities. Oh, never mind, I know, sorry. I'm a bit of a technophobe. So far this year, we've had our annual telephone survey that goes out to about 400 homes in the community. So we get a really good amount of public information from that source. We had a town hall meeting also earlier in the year. We had about 65, I think, people come out to that. That was sort of an open format with a microphone. People could come up and say whatever they had to say. It was kind of interesting because probably about a third of the people said, gee whiz, we'd really like our taxes to be lower. And about 2/3 of the people said, gee whiz, we'd really like to have these more services. So as we go through today's presentation, you'll see how that becomes a real challenge for our council, and that's why we need your help. Tonight's meeting is sort of a more standard budget process. We're going to give you some background information, and then I'm hopeful that each one of you will fill out a questionnaire for us that's going to ask you some things about how you would allocate and fit into that balance between more services and more taxes, and how you might sort of see our different services and which ones are most important to you. So with a little bit of luck, we'll get quite a number of surveys back. And finally, all of this information, you'll notice that we're sort of leaning toward this side here because this is being webcast, and it's going to be on our website for people who aren't able to come out tonight to sort of have their opportunity to participate as well. So let's get started with some background information. I like to start a lot of budget and tax presentations with this slide because it provides a little bit of perspective about what we're talking about here. This is a graphic that's prepared, I think, by the Fraser Institute, actually, and what it shows is the relative proportion of all the different taxes that are paid for by Canadian families. And you can see that for every dollar of taxes paid in the country, about 8 cents goes to your local municipality through property taxes. So we're not talking about a very large piece of the pie here, which is one of the challenges that we face. You can also sort of see that the vast majority of taxes paid by Canadians are either income taxes, which come off all of our paychecks, and we don't really sort of see it going, we just get our net pay, or consumption taxes that are embedded in the cost of the different things that we buy. The challenge with that is none of those larger taxes come back to the municipality to help us with the services that we provide to the community. So it puts us in a difficult spot. Just to look at how the city spends our money, in our 2011 budget, we budget to bring in $243 million worth of revenue over the course of the year. 70% of that revenue, made up of 50% taxes and 20% various and sundry user fees, comes from residential sources. So the people who live here and the businesses who live here pay those funds. About 30% of it comes from non-resident sources, things like interest revenue, casino grants, borrowing, that kind of thing. And each year, we take that $243 million. You'll notice that our revenues are $243 million, and our expenditures are $243 million. We have to balance our budget. We're legally required to do that. So the revenues and the expenses will always match. We budget to take all that money and use it to provide the services that are really important to the community. And you'll notice that the biggest sort of single colored area of that pie is our capital expenditures. That's the red chunk of the pie. That is the cost to build all of the roads that we drive on every day, all of the pools and the ice rinks and the sports fields that our kids play on every day, and all of the pipes that bring fresh water to our house and yucky water away from our house, all of those things. They're pretty important services that we use each and every day. The second biggest area of expenditure is probably our protective services, police and fire together. They add up to about $50 million. The next ones, the sort of gray and black ones, those are all of our public works. That's all the pipes and the roads that sort of are the base of all the services that we provide to the community. And finally, our parks, recreation, and culture is the bright green one. That's all the cost of running all the pools and all the things that we use every day to sort of make this a nice community. So most of these services are used by the residents most every day of the week. The next set of slides I'm going to show you, now that we know what we spend our money on, this shows you a little bit about how do our services and the cost of our services in Coquitlam compare to other jurisdictions. Every year, every municipality in British Columbia has to fill out these very, very detailed financial reporting forms that go into the province, along with our audited financial statements. And all that data goes into a giant database that's on the provincial website. So we're able to go into that database and look and see what our costs are and what other municipalities' costs are for different kinds of services. And so one of the things that we do for our council every year is we do a comparison, and it's very difficult, of course, to compare. How do you compare a Coquitlam with 120,000 people to a Port Moody with 25,000 people? Not very comparable. So how we compare it is on a per capita basis. So we take the expenditure for a certain kind of thing, and we divide it by our population, and that should make it relatively comparable. So that's what we're comparing to. And what you'll see here is a comparison for 3 years. On the left-hand side, you can see Coquitlam's expenditures from 2008 to 2010 for what we call general government. That's all the overhead stuff, all of the services that we need to have to support the frontline services that you as residents see. So, payroll and hiring and recruiting and financial reporting and all those background things and computers and all that stuff, and council, of course, all the legislative process. So those are the kinds of expenses that you see in that category. And what we compare to is the average of the GVRD, or Metro Vancouver. So we're comparing ourselves to the average of all the other municipalities in the same region with the same sort of cost pressures. And what you see when you look at this first area is Coquitlam's expenses over the 3 years are lower than the comparison group. Well, as a finance person, that's kind of what I want to see. I'm pretty sure some of the managers would not like that as much. They'd rather see that we had more resources to provide more services, but that means we're being reasonably efficient. The other thing that I noticed about this particular slide is it's interesting to see how our costs have gone down over the 3 years. That's something you wouldn't expect to see. With regular contract labor adjustments, you would expect to see those costs going up. But everyone will remember that the end of 2008, beginning in 2009, we had a very difficult economy. And the city found itself in a position with a shortage of revenue because of dropping interest rates and reduced development activity. And so we had to do some serious adjusting to make sure that we could live within our budget. And a number of those cuts came to the overhead areas. So you see a lot of reduction in costs in that period of time in this area, because our council was very clear, we want to see most of those reductions in places that don't hurt our residents. We want to try and make this as painless as possible. So that's why you see that being lower in this particular case. The next area we compare is protective services. This is a combination of police and fire. This is about $50 million worth of spending per year. And what you see is, again, we are lower than the average in the GVRD. So we spend a little bit less. Some of the municipalities within the GVRD don't have RCMP. They have their own municipal police forces. Those tend to be a bit more expensive. The other thing that I notice when I look at this is over the years, you'll see rather than a decrease in expenses here, you see an increase. In 2009, we hired 6 new police officers and we hired a new fire inspector, which drove our costs up. The reason we did that is we hear regularly from the community that we want more protective services, not less. We want more police officers, more firefighters. So council responds to those things that we hear from the community and adds more resources. Of course, when we got to 2010, the second year of this tough economy, there wasn't very much added for anybody. It was pretty tight. So there were no new additions in that year. Okay. Next area we look at is recreation and cultural services. And again, you'll see we're very close to the Metro Vancouver average, but we are a little bit less. We're catching up. You'll see in 2009 there's quite an increase. The reason for that is we brought online a whole bunch of new facilities. We have a new pool up at Chimo, new ice rink, and there's additional operating costs related to those new facilities. And so those hit us in 2009. The decrease in 2010, to be honest, is not a permanent reduction. We had a reorganization in that department, and we had a number of vacancies that weren't filled. I think you'll see that caught up in the next year if you're here again and you happen to see this kind of a comparison in the future. Next area is our public works. So that's all the roads and the pipes. So that's sewer, water, drainage, garbage collection, and roads is what's included in here. And when you look at that, we're extremely comparable to the Metro Vancouver average. In fact, we all move in the same sort of pattern. And the reason for that is many of those systems are part of regional systems. We're part of a regional road network. Our sewer and water pipes click into the regional system, and an awful lot of our costs are driven by Metro Vancouver. And so it makes absolute sense that our costs would move in the same range that theirs did. So not very surprising. This is probably the most meaningful slide. This is total municipal expenditures. So this takes every department. If you talk to any municipality and you look at their costs, they'll tell you the story of their municipality. And we're all a little different. We choose a different mix of services, a different kinds of things that our community likes. So everybody's a little bit different. But when you take total municipal expenditures, that basket of service all comes together. We all provide a very similar mix of services. We provide parks and recreation, we provide public works, we provide protective services, and then a bunch of overhead and planning and those kind of things. And when you get to the end of the day, what this tells you is Coquitlam spends a little bit less. We provide a very similar basket of services, but we spend a little bit less. It's not meant to sort of point out any other municipality, but just to say, you know what, we're not the big spenders in the pile. We spend in the range that one would expect for these kinds of things. So how does that translate into the bill for any particular household? Right now, the average house in Coquitlam, the average home, is about $540,000, and this is how their bill would break out. Now, probably most of you, when you look at that total of about $2,700, you'll say, my tax bill is bigger than that. This is the portion that's the municipal services. You also pay school taxes. You also pay TransLink taxes. We're not talking about that today because we don't have the ability to influence or change that. What we're talking about is the municipal services and getting your input on how we deal with those. When you take that list, it's pretty tough. We know that when we send you that bill in July, it's tough to write that check for $2,700. It's not easy. But when you break it down into its component services, it's a lot easier to understand what it is you're paying for and what value that you get. When you look at each piece, it's actually pretty good value. My favorite one, and the one that's most obvious to me, is water. Water up there, it tells you for the whole year for water, you pay $384. That's about $1.05 a day, about $1 a day. And for that, you get unlimited quantities of the best drinking water in the world. We use it to wash our cars, to water our lawns, clean our dogs. We use that water quite a lot. And not one of us, I think, here would probably hesitate to spend $2 for a bottle of water. So you can sort of see that unlimited quantities for $1 a day is pretty good value because we probably all drink more than one bottle of water a day. This is a comparison that shows how each of those city costs are on the bottom compared to a whole bunch of other standard household costs that probably all of us buy. And so it sort of gives you a proportion of how that works out. For example, basic cablevision. I don't know anybody who actually has basic cablevision. Even I broke down and got some extra channels recently. But basic cablevision will cost you $497 a year. That's more than any one of the municipal services like fresh drinking water and police protection. So it's pretty good value. I think when you look at these things, it's very clear that when we provide a service on a community-wide basis for everybody, we're able to achieve an economy of scale that you can't get at otherwise. It's funny, I was talking to somebody who comes from a community where they don't happen to provide garbage services. It's not something that their community offers. So everyone has to go out and hire their own company to come and pick up their garbage. So what happens is, not everybody on the street picks the same person or the same company. So you have 3 or 4 trucks coming once a week to all these different houses. It's obviously more efficient if one truck comes to the street, picks up all the garbage, and goes. And that's how we achieve savings. So here's how this looks. If you take, this is a comparison that is actually done. It's not done by us. It's done by the City of Surrey, as a matter of fact, and they do it on behalf of the Municipal Collectors Group. So all the tax collectors get together as a group, and they do this review. And what they do is they look at the taxes for every city. And this is all in your tax bill that you get in July, your utility bill that you get, I think you get it mid-February for payment March 31st, and your school taxes, the whole ball of wax. And when you compare that for a single detached home, Coquitlam falls out right in the middle. So we're pretty average in terms of what we spend. This is a bit more interesting. This is not a single detached home. This is the same comparison for the average home. Well, the average home is not necessarily a single detached home. It could be an apartment, could be a townhouse. So depending on the mix of multi-unit sort of homes that you have in your community, that will change your value and will move where you are on this list. And if you look, the places that are more single-family home-oriented, like North Van District, will be a little higher because their value will be a little higher because they're talking about detached homes. Whereas if you look at North Van City, where it's more urban and there's more towers and smaller units, it's a little bit lower. So this is quite influenced by the mix of multifamily that you have in your community. I would expect that over time, as Coquitlam gets more multifamily, this might shift a little bit. So, having said all that and sort of showing you how we spend your money and how we compare and that maybe it's reasonable, maybe not, we still have a responsibility to each and every one of you to try and make the very best decisions we can on your behalf. Actually, to be honest, it's not actually easy. What we need to do is we need to, every year, as it comes time to budget, every single person in this community probably has a different idea of what the perfect mix of services is. And so what we need to do is we need to balance all of the increasing costs for services, which are always increasing, with people's willingness to pay. And the reality is no one wants to pay more, but everybody wants more services. And unfortunately, when you look at this balance, there are way more things weighing down the cost side. The revenue side is always rather light, and the cost side is influenced by a whole bunch of things. First thing, of course, is inflation. We are subject to a number of contracts, particularly our labor contracts, and we all know from our personal budgeting, to do exactly the same stuff as we did last year for our families, it's going to cost more this year because your BC Hydro goes up, your TELUS goes up, your Terrace and Gas goes up, your soccer fees go up, I don't know, everything goes up. And so there's a natural tendency for the cost side of this equation to go up, right? And the city's no different. It's just bigger. And so the number is just bigger. But the effect is exactly the same. The other thing that we have weighing down that cost side is we have a growing community. I mean, look at all the cranes out there. There's a lot going on in this community. And so every year there are more people and more homes that we need to provide that same basket of services to. So that is a big cost pressure for the city. The other thing that we're challenged by is aging infrastructure. Coquitlam's now 100 years old. We just actually got rid of a pool and an ice rink that were more than 40 years old. So what happens is we build these big facilities and things that the community loves and uses every single day, and over time they get old and they need to be replaced. And they're very, very expensive. And so we've got that cost pressure coming at us. The other thing that we have that I'm not sure everybody's aware of, but I know our business community is very aware of, is we have an uneven tax distribution. Historically, Coquitlam has been a community that had very reasonable residential taxes. And we had slightly heavier business taxes. And then what happens is if you take a community that's growing and you increase the service levels as we have in the last 20 years, there's room on the residential side to grow that tax value. And so there's room for the residential taxes to go up and stay in the middle. On the business side, it goes up and it gets much harder. And so Coquitlam has a challenge that we recognize that we need to address that because we have an uneven tax distribution, and we've been working on it for the last 15 years, and we're shifting a little bit. The challenge is, if somebody's going to pay a little bit less, somebody else has to pay a little bit more. And that weighs down that cost for our residents. Difficult thing to do, and nobody wants to pay more. So council's job is to determine what is that right mix of more services, more costs, or accepting of inflation with people's willingness to pay, and what's the right balance. And for every person, it's probably just a little bit different. And so they have to work on finding what makes most of the people the most happy most of the time. You're never going to get it all perfect. So some of the biggest challenges that we have are, of course, inflation. I hear all the time, right now CPI is about 3%, and if we looked at what I would guess our inflation might be, you know, it probably might turn out to be around 3%. And people say to me all the time, well, gee, how come your inflation isn't CPI? Well, you know what? There's a reason for that. CPI is a measure of the inflation on a standard basket of household goods and services. So that's stuff like rent and insurance and food and clothing and shoes and, I don't know, babysitting or gasoline or all the things that households use. That's not what the city buys. The city mostly buys very specialized labor. We buy police officers and firefighters and planners and engineers, all very highly qualified people to provide certain kinds of services on behalf of the entire community. So sometimes our cost doesn't match exactly with CPI. It's a little bit different. Sometimes it does. This year I think it actually might turn out better than usual. Probably will be in that range, but not always. And so you have to be mindful of what it is that we buy here that provides value to our community. We also have new operating costs arising from our capital projects. In 2010, the additional capital in this community was $100 million. Developers put in $30 million worth of capital. That's roads and pipes and things in our community. And we have to maintain that. So every time you build something new, there's operating costs for it and then costs to replace it. So we have to think about those things, and so our costs go up from those kinds of things. And as we're growing, there is a very large build-out of costs of things that we have to maintain in the future. And of course, we're also subject to the Metro Vancouver increases, which are regional, and we really don't have a lot of choice on those. So those are the sort of big cost drivers that impact the city. So it's way, way, way too early for me to predict what the tax numbers will look like, because none of this stuff will get decided until after the municipal elections in November. However, we've put together a sort of a sample scenario of how it could look, given some of the information that we know, just for illustrative purposes and to help you with the questionnaire that we want you to fill out. So if we were looking very broad brush at what the biggest cost drivers for the city were and what they might look like, we have labor contracts, including our RCMP members that are going to have an increase, probably for sure. We think that's probably going to be in the range of about 2%. It's going to cost us about $2 million. We know that we have non-labor inflation. We have kerosene gas increase, hydro increase. We have gasoline increases for our fleet. The city operates with a very large fleet. There's additional costs of insurance, all those kind of things. We think that's maybe going to cost us $900,000. On a base of about $90 million worth of expenses, that's less than 1%. That's very lean. Seems like a big number, but it's very lean. We also have operating costs for new capital. So that $30 million worth of developer-built infrastructure, the $70 million that we built, we're in the process of building a new library for the citizens in 2012. We're going to have to put books in there and people in there and operate that. There's costs involved. So we have some increasing costs coming at us. We also have some things we have to look at to make sure that we're responsible to the future and we don't set up a big liability for our kids. So we just built an ice rink and we borrowed $23 million from our land sale reserve. Well, we're going to need to pay that back. So we have to set up a debt repayment. It probably will be in the range of $1 million. Not sure, but that would be a reasonable sort of a range to put it in. We also have to think if we've added $100 million worth of assets, we need to grow how much money we're setting aside for asset replacement. So we need to increase that number. So there's all these cost pressures that add up to, wow, this could cost a lot of money and could impact our taxes. On the very fortunate side, there's lots of cranes out there and there's lots going on in the city and there's a whole bunch of new taxpayers that are going to chip in and help pay for some of this stuff, and new development fees that are going to chip in and help to pay for some of this stuff. So maybe at the end of the day, all the revenues and all the expenses, it comes out to be, I don't know, maybe a 3% tax increase. Magically matches to CPI this year. So that's not necessarily where we're going to end up. This is an illustrative example of how it might end up. But what we want you to do is think about that. You know, inevitably, you're looking at some level of increase. And so what council has to do is to decide what to do about that. Do we want to have new services? Do we want to just cover inflation? So at the end of the day, you can put together a budget a million different ways. You can have more firefighters, more police officers. There's a myriad of things you can do. The truth is, though, there's really 3 basic options. You can have more services, which means you cover your inflation and you add police officers and firefighters and skating rinks and whatever mix of things you want to add. You say, nope, no more services. The service level we have right now is perfect. This is what we want. So maybe we just cover inflation. Or you say, nope, it's all too expensive. We want it to be less. And then you have to think about what kinds of things could you live with less of. So there's really, you know, there's a million choices, but there's 3 basic things that could happen. Absolutely. Well, you're right. And you know what? The city, in fact, does that every year. We look at all of our services all the time, and we make trade-offs between one thing and another. Each general manager is encouraged to bring forward new sort of existing money in their budget that they could shift and use for emerging needs, and we do that all the time. We're trying to make a simplistic example so that I can ask you, okay, if you're doing this, which are the services you want more of, and which do you want less of? What's your tolerance? Which is what our question that we're asking you to fill out is going to be about. Of course, there's a myriad of options, but you have to simplify it to get a group to do an activity. But the city does that all the time. Every year as part of our budget, we go through a cutting exercise. I think it was interest revenue, actually. I think that was interest revenue. I don't think we have, do we have interest costs on there? Which one's this? Oh yeah, that's principal and interest, and that's the proportion of our expenditures. That's not the rate. Debt interest payments. So it's debt and interest payments. That's 5%. Yeah. I can actually answer that, and you're absolutely right. The wedge of that pie has gotten considerably bigger in this past couple of years, and there's a really, really good reason for that, and it is none of it is being paid out of tax money. There's a couple of different things. The first thing is we short-term borrowed $12 million in order to speed up the construction of the ice rink. And we borrowed that at 1.75%, so really, really low borrowing rate. And what we were going to do is one of the financing sources for that ice rink, which is sort of casino money, and the casino money that we were getting that was contributed to that project was $6 million a year. We were able to speed up the project by 2 years, but of course we weren't going to receive that casino money in the right time. If we finished it in 2010, we still needed the 2011 and 12 casino collections to help pay for it. So we short-term financed it. We were able to save $5 million with an interest cost of, I think it was $150 a year? I think about $400,000? No, the interest is being paid out of the casino money, which it was originally going to be paid out of. So we actually saved $5 million worth of construction costs, and the money still coming from the same casino fund, and taxes did not go up to fund that. We did another thing. The city has been actually quite aggressive on this because interest rates on short-term borrowing have been very, very low, and we've had money to be able to make some of these payments. So one of the things that happened is in the past year, in 2010, as part of the economic stimulus fund that was brought out by the federal government, we were able to get infrastructure grants to do a whole bunch of work. And you've probably all noticed there's a huge amount of paving that's gone on all the way along Lougheed Highway. Well, what happened was the federal government said, we'll give you a grant of $6 million if you can come up with the matching $12 million. Yeah. Well, we had a surplus of $3 million, which is about 2%. Mm-hmm. Yes, actually it does. Yes, it does. Actually, the city has a policy where all surpluses earned go into the city's infrastructure reserve that help us to finance all these big capital projects and infrastructure replacements that we need. And in fact, council went through that infrastructure fund or infrastructure reserve and allocated that to some necessary projects that would have to be or see tax increases to deal with, and we don't have to now. We're putting some amenities in Mayardville and in Mackin Park. None of our budget the upside budget on that project is $15 million. Approximately 10 of it is the actual purchase of the building, and there's the remaining 5 is to outfit the building, fill it with shelves and books and all the things that you need to make it be a library. And the numbers are in the budget. Nothing is hidden. The operating costs are embedded here. They're not finally approved because we're still trying to sharpen our pencil and try and do it as inexpensively as possible. That'll be part of the budget discussions that go into 2012. Sir. Let me just look. Got my little trustee statements here, and I can tell you that number. Okay. The city has $34 million worth of debt. Most of that is for long-term infrastructure, but there is some short-term borrowing. And we actually have several short-term borrowing items just recently. And one of them is that road project. And I personally am very confident that that was a huge value for the community. We got $6 million free dollars just to use the road paving money for the next 3 or 4 years that we already had in place. And so we got an awful lot of work done several years early. We also borrowed for the ice rink. So we basically have, what's that, 9 and 12? Oh, $20 million of additional debt that's short-term and will be gone in the next couple of years. Yep. In fact, we have just made an early payment on some of the road borrowing. In fact, I just signed the thing for it today because council approved that we had some leftover money actually related to the ice that we put into that debt to sort of get our road program back on track as early as possible. But the $3.4 million that went into the infrastructure reserve went to different projects. So it didn't go to debt this time. Yeah, that's not 5% interest. That's 5% of our expenditures are related to debt payments. That's a percentage of our whole expenditures. We're not paying 5% on our debt. Most of that short-term borrowing, we're paying 1.75% because short-term debt from the Municipal Finance Authority is at an incredibly low rate at the moment. And if you know where the money's coming from to pay it back, you can make a really good use of currently the market. Construction prices are very low. So we're actually getting more roadworks done than we were getting a year ago for a fraction of the price with very low interest rates. Nope, it's variable. But I don't know if you saw the markets today. I think it's going to be going down, not up. So that should be to our advantage. So sometimes, I know it always seems like the best thing to do would be to pay debt. And to be perfectly honest, as an accountant and a very conservative soul myself, that's generally what I think too. I love making debt payments. But the truth is it doesn't always make sense. If you have infrastructure that needs to be replaced and you can use your funds wisely and garner other people's money so that our residents don't have to pay for it, 1.75% is very inexpensive. Right? So you might be better off. So we look at all of those things, we balance it up, and we try to make really smart choices in order to get as much of other people's money as possible, as early as possible, to give you the services as soon as possible. That's what we try to do. And I'm pretty confident we do a reasonable job of that. Well, I think you're making a perfect segue for me. I can assure you, first off, that our council takes those concerns that you're talking about very seriously. These decisions are really hard for them, and that's why we want your help, because we want that opinion. We want them to hear how you feel about that. So the exercise we're asking you to do, and I hope you all picked one up as you came through and registered, we want you to, oh, sorry, I've skipped past now. Gee, I talk fast, hey? Okay, we want you to put yourself in council's shoes and tell them just that. Clearly your choice would be option 3. You're looking for reductions because you're feeling the stress of increased costs. And our council wants to hear that, and they take that very seriously. So the purpose of this exercise is to hear from all of you, which way would you do it? So we're asking you to be council. You have that hard job, and you tell us, which way would you like to do it? Would you like to, if you choose option 1, which is more services, so we cover the cost of inflation, we add some police, we do this, whatever, the tax rate goes up, that's not going to be Elwood's choice, but that might be somebody's choice. Tell us that. But if you pick that option, we also want you to tell us which are those services that you're prepared to pay more for, because we want to know that. That helps us make this decision. If you're in favor of option 2, you know what, I like my services the way they are, I'm prepared to maybe cover the inflation, but that's it, then you're kind of off the hook, because we know what those services are. If you feel like Elwood does, you're in option 3. You're going, oh, it's all too expensive for me. I don't want you repaving the roads. I don't want you doing this. Tell us. So if you say it's going to be less, we want you to tell us what services can you live with less of, because that's really the hard one. You know, when we had our town hall meeting where everybody came and spoke at the open mic, we heard from a whole lot of people, probably a third, gee whiz, they felt like you, Elwood. They want the taxes to be lower. The other 2/3 of people said, we want this, we want this, we want tennis courts, we want that. So council has to decide that, and it's really difficult for them. So let's have your opinion. You can tell us that. Okay, the next thing we want you to do, the second question, you're not getting off very light here. We're asking you to do a little bit of work. We never told you there's never a free cookie. We want you to tell us about your satisfaction with different services. We've listed a bunch of services, and we want to know how happy you are with them. Because if we know everybody's really happy with a certain service, maybe we don't need any increases there. Maybe we could cut back a little bit there. If we know everybody's really unhappy with some service, we know we have to do something about that. So we want to understand that, because that helps council in that important decision of balancing the cost of more services with people's willingness to pay. Okay? And the final question is just a blank slate. If you got something on your chest, you want council to hear it, write it down. We want to hear that. So, any questions? This will be. What's happening is we're sort of leaning this way because we're trying to webcast this, and this is going to be on our website as well as the questionnaire. So hopefully other people who didn't manage to make it tonight will be able to do this from home. Sorry, what? Where's that coming from? That would be is that our draw from reserve or our contribution? That's revenue? Transfer from reserves? That's a revenue. Is that the one? Oh, transfers too. That is money that we set aside for asset replacement in the future. So we have a whole bunch of different assets. The city now, the value of the city's assets right now are $1.6 billion. That's the cost. That's the historic cost, not the replacement cost. The historic cost of all the roads and all the pipes and all the buildings and all those things that we use every day to provide services to the community. $1.6 billion. So we need to set aside some depreciation to replace those, to replace the vehicle fleet, to replace the fire trucks, those kinds of things. So that's what that is. That's our contribution to savings to replace our assets and to ensure our sustainability in the future. Yeah, we put in money every year, and then it grows. But it's not 7. It's 7% of the total expenditures. So that's the amount that we're putting in. Yes, some of those, but you have to remember, some of those contributions, they go in and then they come right back out. Like if it's a contribution to the development cost charge reserve, it comes right out a couple of years when we build whatever the asset is that those development fees are paying for, right? So it goes in and then it comes out to be spent on different assets. It's a little bit complicated, but.
When you start on a new capital project, or bridge or whatever, how do you determine the optimal lifespan or design lifespan for it?
Mark, do you want to help me out with that one? You're a construction guy. Can you? Yeah. Yeah, it depends on the asset. We probably use what would be considered best practices in the industry. So our buildings, I think, are depreciated over I don't know, I think it's 40 years. The surface of roads is 20 years. The underside is a little bit longer. Certain kinds of pipes are up to, like, I think 75 years, big sewer pipes and things like that. It depends on the asset.
I'm thinking more of an integrated asset, such as, say, a swimming pool. You can design it to last 20 years, or 50 years, or 100 years, and it's going to cost you different amounts based upon your anticipated lifespan.
Okay, our expected lifespan of that pool, I would imagine, is in the range of 40 years, but there will be many components of that pool that will be replaced much earlier, like boilers and heaters and things, yeah. But we have to provide for those things too, on that life cycle. Yep. They're in the process of doing that right now. We're just getting ready to receive their submissions and their requests for what they need. And those will all be at the budget meetings when we have them with council. All their requests of the things they want. Well, actually, this year it's a little bit different. Normally we do that process and we finish it by December 31st so that we start the year with a budget in place. This year, because there happens to be an election in November, everything's pushed back, and that will be, those departmental budget submissions will come to council in, I think it's January, February? January? Do you know the dates? They'll be at open meetings. Second or third week of January? Yeah. Yep. I think the gentleman behind you, sir, because he hasn't had a chance yet. Well, you know, they're different every year depending on the development activity. Right now, we're doing very well. We have most development cost charges we've had for ages. This year to date, I believe collections are about 15 million, and we're only in September. Last year, they were 15 for the whole year. The year before, they were nearly nothing. They were like 2 million because development activity in the big crunch fell off. So, you know, it changes depending on the activity, but you know what, right now, about $15 million a year. 15. Well, actually, our forecast for 2011 is 15, but we've already hit it, so we're doing actually quite well. You have to remember, though, development cost charges they're a legislated levy, and they're very specific, that you levy these fees to developers who are bringing more growth into the community for the infrastructure that needs to be there to house that growth. So that money can only be spent on a very, very specific suite of projects, right? If we build our cost charge levy saying, you know what, we're going to build this road and that road, when we get the money in, all we can do with it is build this road and that road. That's all we're able to do. You have to build the projects that are in that levy. It can't be used to fund anything else in the community. But we are fortunate that, you know, recently we have development cost charges for roads, for sewer, for water, for drainage, and for park land, and for park improvements. Unfortunately, we don't have them for other amenities that also are needed for growth, like fire halls and police station expansions and those kind of things. But the legislation only allows certain things. Unfortunately, no. No. We would really like it if they were. Because, you know, that's one of those things that's very easy to see, that growth brings a need for more fire services. The more houses you put up on Burke Mountain, the more you're going to need some fire services up there. It's a challenge. I'm sorry. A credit rating? Not really. You know what? We use the MFA for all of our financing. We use the Municipal Finance Authority, which for lack of a better term, is like a co-op of all the municipalities, and they have a AAA rating. So that's why we get such good rates. I get calls from banks all the time wanting to loan us money because they see cities as doing lots of infrastructure, and gee, they'd like to loan us money. The reality is they can't possibly compete with the rates that we get from the MFA, and as soon as you tell them the kind of rates we get from the MFA, they just go, okay, I'm out, can't do it. You can go to the MFA website and it'll tell you all about it. Yep. The Municipal Finance Authority. Oh, well, we don't have our own rating. We do all of our financing through the Municipal Finance Authority, which is our co-op to do that. So if you go to the Municipal Finance Authority website, you will find all that information. And we, as a group, the member municipalities, we have a AAA rating. Any more? Are we ready to go do our question? Oh, no. Darn. Rats. Okay.
How are programs evaluated for extension, expansion, or extinction? Are they done at the department or branch level or at the executive level? And so how do you terminate a program once it's
Well, the truth is it's very hard to terminate a program once it's started, because what happens is there are citizens out there who like that program, and as soon as we try to do less of something, which is why that's one of the questions we're asking you, is it becomes a problem very quickly because citizens like their services, and if we cut back on these services, we hear about it. But we look at all the services every year. General managers are encouraged to bring forward if they want to think they should be doing this instead of that. They have the ability to bring that forward at budget time and try and make those movements. The problem is that, we have to do these things within what the citizens want. It's the citizens' money in the end, and our politicians are very in tune with that, and they hear about it. If we stop doing something, we hear about it very quickly. But we do have a process that we call a cyclical review. So we go through certain areas on a cyclical basis. We pick a certain area, and we do a review where we do a 3-year budget exercise where we go line by line. Makes Lou happy. We go through line by line and look at every single cost and every single variance for a 3-year period. And we bring in an outside expert who knows about that business independent of us to take a look and say, gee whiz, what are the best practices here and how could we do this better? So we try very hard to be as efficient as possible. But actually getting rid of a municipal service is very challenging because somebody out there really likes it. We do some sharing between the municipalities. We share police, of course, with Port Coquitlam. That's sort of the biggest cost share that we do. This one detachment is for both communities, and it's a seamless operation. We do mutual aid between our fire halls. If we happen to have a very large fire demand, each of the other municipalities, we backfill for each other. Perhaps, do you want to say anything about that, Tony? Is that about right? That's good. But we share animal services. Port Moody uses our animal shelter and animal services. So there are lots of things that we do together. We do vector control, which is, I think, bugs and rats, with Port Coquitlam. So there's all sorts of different things that we do together. We also, one of the things that's very unique about municipalities is that, we all sort of have our own little monopoly. So while we're in the same business, unlike a profit-oriented organization, we don't compete with each other. We can cooperate. And so we all cooperate with each other in terms of sharing information and helping each other to sort of try and do a better job. Does that answer your question? Okay, one last question. Everybody agree? Yes? Yeah. Yeah, I think there was a report in a public meeting about that, wasn't there? It was presented at council. I'm sure we could get that for you. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it was $3.5 million, and we put it to specific projects, and we can certainly make that available to you. No problem. Any other questions?
have time, and I accept that, it's a busy time.
Yep.
If I could on behalf of council, we have fun. And last year we didn't have this many. We're ecstatic. We've got double the
Yeah,
number.
this is good.
This year. There was one, or maybe the year before.
There was one in the Centennial Room, and the year before it was at Dogwood Pavilion. So we try to move it around to see if maybe that would get more people out. The truth is, this is an easier venue. There's more seats, and it's more workable. But, we've done it in different places, and we struggle to get a good turnout. Yeah. Well, you know what? Perhaps that means not that many people are unhappy.
Every single member of council would love to see more people engaged in these questions because this is your life. And they're all tough choices, and we hear we fix the potholes, we pave the roads, and we build a new thing, and build this, and keep our taxes down, all those things. So we would love if everybody participated in this process. That won't happen, and they're all difficult choices. So, and I really, on behalf of council, we really appreciate those of you who come out tonight, and we urge you to be really blunt about the kinds of things that you believe we ought to be doing, because all of council is going to be paying close attention. 5 of us are here with you, and it's a busy time, so it's hard for us to get there.
Oh.
We're working on more policing.
Sir? Well, we haven't put it online yet. Last year we got 2. I think, was it 2? We got 2. Yeah. That's why, though, that's why we do the telephone survey, because that goes out to 400 homes. In the years where we're doing our strategic plan, it goes to 600 homes, and that is statistically valid, so that it's random and it's statistically valid, so that it does give us some true feeling about the community. And part of what we get back every year is, I think it's 98% of people are happy with the services in Coquitlam. Perhaps that's why we don't get a good turnout here, because people are mostly happy. Yeah. From May to now? Perhaps. Okay, ma'am? Sorry, we're just trying to catch those people leaving, get a questionnaire from them. Sure. We would really like for people, we've set up tables here hoping that you'll fill them out while you're here, while this is fresh in your mind. The tables are structured so that you can talk to each other and get input from each other. But if you want to take it home, could you have it back to us in a couple of weeks, 2 weeks? We're going to keep it on the web for 2 weeks. We're going to try and get it there tomorrow. We're not really sure how well the webcast will come out with the slides, so we're going to put the slides on the web as well. So, a couple weeks. Yes. Truth is, if we got one late, we'd take it. Yeah. Yes. Nope.
Now, I know that council has requested not too long ago to make some changes to the provincial legislation. The changes they requested is not passed, but they requested that the fee charges be taken out of the new park acquisition for the park. So my question is, can council not also request changes in legislation to increase or to include the fee charges higher? And can that be made?
That request can be made. Normally what happens is it's made through the UBCM. UBCM conferences, I think, next week. Yep. And I believe there have been multiple requests for that from the municipal level, because we're not unique. All municipalities are feeling the pinch, and the legislation covers certain kinds of infrastructure. You have to, just to be clear, it does not cover police and fire operations. What DCC charges cover is the cost of new infrastructure. So if you were to get them, it might help you build the fire hall or the expanded police hall. It wouldn't cover the operating costs of more firefighters. That's not what they're meant for. They're meant to be infrastructure charges to build roads, to build pipes, to build parks, that kind of thing. They do not at this point in time, and we would like them to. Yeah, we would like them to. That has been requested, I think, in numerous occasions.
It hasn't been our council, I don't think, this is not the last 3 years, but every year at UBCM there are resolutions that get passed requesting those kinds of changes. I don't know if the fire hall would ever get on there because we're perhaps one of 4 or 5 municipalities in the entire province that would need a new fire hall because of new development. That typically doesn't happen. So these are typically services that are required, development cost charges are services that are required because of new development. And we need a new fire hall because of new development in one area, but it is an unusual area, an area that was planned 25 years ago and is now undergoing development. That is utility. So, and likewise, no one needs a new police station because you have a new, if you have new development, you quite often need an expansion of your police station, but how do you look at it? So it is development cost charges. The province has also been resistant to add them because of the impact they have on housing affordability. So there's that down on the provincial level, but every year those resolutions do get passed at UBCM, requesting an expansion of the scope of development cost charges, including the scope, for example, one last example, artificial turf fields. If you build an artificial turf field, it can't be paid for out of development cost charges, but if you build 10 grass fields, then those can be all covered. But you need all 10 of them to serve the needs of one artificial turf field because turf can get 18 hours a day, whereas grass fields can be used 18 times a week. So every municipality would like to see perhaps the ability to use ECCs for artificial turf fields, but it could be more environmentally friendly for that matter because it wouldn't be cutting down, so it wouldn't be growing from fields. But those are the challenges we have. Requesting expansion of those rights, and you don't get them. We can always act, and we do put forward resolutions to the UBCM. Typically, they go to UBCM, LMLGA, and sometimes SCM, depending on where they're directed. And some of them get passed, some of them don't get passed. Once they get passed, a few of those get acted on. Not always. In fact, not often. In fact, that's right.
That is the operating expenditure, so that is firefighters, the operation of their trucks, all their equipment, education. Nope, that's our whole cost. Oh, wait. Yeah? Well, it's a relatively small department. You have a group of fairly people with a high level of expertise, but it's not as large a department. It's mostly people power. They don't have big trucks. They're not driving all over the place. So relative to, say, a fire department or a police department, they're quite small, so they use up less of the resources. Sure. Mm-hmm. You know what, I'm not certain about the specific projects related to that area in the DCC list, but there are definitely transportation-related DCCs, and there's transportation works, things like some of the improvements that you might see around SkyTrain coming in and those kind of things. There's certainly park acquisition money that could be spent in that area. Specific projects, I'm not actually attuned to that. If you really were interested, we could look and get back to you on that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pardon me? It's not, but it will be. When we get the webcast together, and we'll put the slides and the webcast and the questionnaire on our website. Hopefully tomorrow, but it's not me that does that, so early next week for sure, but maybe tomorrow if I'm very fortunate. Oh. I don't think so. Pardon me? Yeah. Now that's the operating costs for our roadworks, and so that's, you know, street cleaning and the fleet and, yeah, all that kind of stuff, snow clearing, that kind of thing. This is the operating costs. Any of the capital stuff would be in our capital expenditures. Well, you know what, that's not in our cost. That's a levy that comes directly from them. And remember when we talked about, where are we? This slide, and I said, when you look at that total for about $2,700, you'll all note that your bill that you get for your house will be more than that, because you also pay school taxes and transit taxes. That's where that comes in. So that is a levy direct from them to you. We're just the middleman that has the unfortunate job of collecting it from you.
Further on that, isn't the water from that total, or the water district, if you pass it through, so it's not really
A portion is. We own our own infrastructure, and we have to operate our own infrastructure, but we do get a levy from them, where we actually pay per cubic meter of water that we use. That's part of our cost, yeah. That's built right into the 384. It's not a direct levy from them to you. We levy you for that. Any more? Last? Oh no, all city people, put your hand up. You're not a city person. Almost. Yeah. At these meetings we often outnumber, because we try to help. Just answer questions. Okay, we good? Now, I'm hopeful that all of you will now take all this information you've heard from the presentation, from the questions, and hopefully you'll complete one of our questionnaires for us. If you don't do it right away, you could take it home and send it back to us. We'd really appreciate it. There's coffee and cookies out there. Help yourself. And tables are set up so that you can complete your questionnaire here. You can talk to each other, share ideas. And we'd like to thank you very much for coming out. Thanks. Oh, thank you.